Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and this is Intro to Grant Writing Government Edition. This is one of three variations that we have in our Intro to Grant Writing webinar. There is the core one where we just look at in general at things. There's the fellowship edition where we look specifically at that type of funding and the particular demands and samples that go with it. And in this third incarnation, we're going to look at government funding, particularly but not restricted to the US federal government. Now, if you have a particular area of research or a geographic region that you're working in and especially interested in examples related to that, please let me know by typing in the chat window or by sending me a private message, because it is always a more helpful webinar when it's addressing the things that you are specifically interested in, and I'm happy to customize the examples as we go along. So with that, we are coming to the end of our intercession week 0. If you are new to the Writing Center, welcome. Happy to have you here. We work with students at any point in the writing process on pretty much any project. We have students who come in and they bring course papers. We have students who come in and they bring job application letters, and students who come in, and faculty, with grant applications. So we're happy to work on anything with you. The requirements are you must be doing the writing. You want to tribute all things that you did not yourself create or discover appropriately as befits the genre. So yes, citations in your paper, probably not citations in your cover letter when you're applying for a job. So we are happy to work with you through asynchronous appointments where you schedule a time, you upload a copy of your paper by that time, and then we send you feedback generally within 24 hours, sometimes a little bit longer if it's a holiday. And we also work with students outside of very busy times like week 7. If you send us an email and you request a real-time appointment via phone or Zoom, we're usually able to set those up if you A, give us in advance notice, B, give us a list of times, and C, let us know what you're interested in, because it may be something where we already have a video set up that walks you through that thing, or a how-to that we can quickly record. But if it turns out that we're not able to answer your question in advance, certainly do go ahead and uh, we'll go ahead and proceed with scheduling a appointment. We have additional resources, including sample papers, blog posts, and a complete catalog of webinars on the ACU Online Center website. And I'll just highlight some of the webinars that we have coming up in the next week or so. So there's a lot more than this, including many new ones, and I encourage you to check out the Writing Center website, which now has a easy to browse catalog that we'll look at if we have a little bit more time. All right, so let's start out by clarifying our terminology a little bit. When people use the terms scholarships, fellowships, and grants, they can and do sometimes get used synonymously, but each of these terms has a more specific meaning about what they generally refer to. And so let's just clear up a little terminology here. So the term scholarship almost always refers to a financial gift that does not have to be repaid. It may require meeting eligibility conditions, like you must be enrolled in this class, or you must have a certain minimum GPA, or you must do some amount of service. But it usually does not require that after the scholarship is done that you go and do additional work. Now, fellowships are similar to scholarships, but often have a sort of service component, and this can be multifaceted. I received a fellowship from my department at Boston University that required that I give service to the department. What that meant was not really written out in the fashion of a job requirement, but it meant, they expected me to be present and to volunteer for things as they came up, and that was fine. I've also held a teaching fellowship where, as the name suggests, you get the money, and it comes with the condition that you be teaching, and research fellowships where you need to do the research and turn in a report. So it's not a case of you just pocket the money and they never hear from you again, but they expect that you will do something and then produce some amount of proof that you've done it. Now, grants, the term usually refers to a sum of money that is given by an organization for a specific purpose, meaning there's something that they want you to do with that, or that you propose to them to do with it, and then they say, all right, well, here's the money to do it. And these can come in individual and organizational varieties, and that'll be most of what we're focusing in on today. Now, when it comes to fellowships, we should also distinguish between internal, like ones that are administered or funded by ACU, versus external, meaning the whole rest of the world. Could be the federal government, could be the state government, it could be Abilene's parent county. And there's a similar thing that you can make this distinction with grants as well. We have internal institutional grants, and there are external grants that we get from outside parties. And because of these mechanisms with grants, there can be different funding. So, for example, most research universities, which includes Abilene Christian University, if you apply for a federal grant, they will award you some amount of money, but the money goes to the university. And there is a negotiated percentage of that grant that the university will charge the award total in return for administering it. You can think of this as a surcharge for offices and printers and things like that. And so that is something to keep in mind if you're getting a institutional grant, that goes to ACU rather than a personal one where they write you a check personally. I've included a number of slides from our other presentations because we frequently get questions about them. So here are a few recommended resources that include fellowship databases. In some of these, you can find other opportunities as well. We'll look at the Duke one shortly. And we also have ACU's internal office. This is the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. And I think it would be helpful for us to take a quick peek at that because it does interlock with some of the things that we're going to be talking about later today. So the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, if you've studied or worked at another institution, and it's a name that comes in a number of different forms. Sometimes it's just the research office. Sometimes it's sponsored programs and events. Sometimes it's just the Office of Institutional and External Research. There are many different names. What we're looking for is the office that is responsible in some shape or form for approving and handling and facilitating both the application and disbursements of research funding. So here I've brought up the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs page here. So we're on their internal grants page right now. You'll see that they have an external funding one, but let's just look at internal really quick. So there's student-facing grants. If you're looking for something as a student, you want to head towards your department and towards the college edge because that student-facing grants are usually allocated in that fashion. Faculty, whether you're working with a faculty person or you are a faculty person yourself and applying directly for yourself, we have these other things here. And I will say that it is very common at research universities, including ACU, for students to approach faculty members that they want to work with and say, hi, I would like to work with you on this project. I would like to apply for this grant and that you would receive, and you would be the PI, the principal investigator. Are you interested in having this conversation? And I'm actually in a kind of thing like that with some faculty right now where we're proposing a research project, and for a variety of reasons, we want someone in particular to be listed as the principal investigator. Sometimes it's because the grant requires that the PI have a specific degree or that they hold a certain rank. What matters is that you agree on the project, you apply and get funding, and then the who has the first name on it, that's only a small part of the credit. This same thing applies to many collaboratively written research articles, where because it's reflecting work by a group or a laboratory, you'll see the first name is almost always the person who got the funding or who was the principal investigator for the funding. And then there's a order of names that in some shape or form is supposed to reflect who contributed to this, which may be more than just the writing and involve the administration, guidance, mentoring, and who provided the money or administered the money as well. So one of these examples here that I know a couple students have gotten is to work with faculty on applying for Cullen grants, which provide summer support for faculty. And that is something where what form the support that is being paid for takes, well, it's very common to hire research assistants, and often those research assistants are graduate students. Similarly, you'll see that for undergraduates, there's this whole category here for faculty can and obtain grants that will pay for undergraduates to work with them, and other things down here. For example, if we had a student in the Doctor of Nursing Practice program who is interested in gerontology research, well, we have a center related to that. All right, let's take a look now at external funding, and we'll head back to the database soon, or the slides soon, but let's look at some of these things here. So they're dedicated pages about how you need to get things approved if you're applying through the university, if ACU is going to be the official applicant of record and administer the money. And then there's also a page about what to do after you get the award process and what format they want the proposal to go in. Most universities have a process by which they will offer feedback on different applications, and usually they will specify how far in advance. It's almost always at least a week. Sometimes it's a month. It depends on the office and which person in the office. So if in doubt, ask. All right, so you'll see that there's also a funding search tools page here that refers to a number of different things, including some that we'll be looking at. And there's also a grant writing tools page that has some other helpful bits of information here. Now, at this point, let's go back to the slide deck here. Got a couple more examples of funding things you can look at. This is more on the, but not exclusively on the student side. A couple specialized things for nursing research involving both government and private funding sources. Let's go ahead and take a look at the NIH one. Now that is a link for a very specific program and for a very specific sort of research, because as you'll see, that link takes us to the NIH page for the National Institute of Nursing Research Funding, which is to say, if you are working as a nurse and you want to do research on nursing, and you're thinking you would love either during your dissertation or doctoral project or afterwards that you want to scale this up in a large way and keep working on this, this is a great page to be checking out. Now, most of the things here will be listed through grants.gov, so we'll talk about that more later, but you also have the benefit of it's just a bit more specific and filtered for your purposes. So you can see that they detail some common types of awards here. You can see that a lot of this is for very large portions of money. And so there's quite a bit that you can do with a, for example, $300,000 project award. And so if you're working on your dissertation or doctoral project and you say, you know what, I could only recruit 20 people on this, but the results sure suggest that something important is here. If I had more funding, I could do the longer or higher number participant version of the study that will allow you to take that the next step forward. So usually, unless you're part of some embedded research project already, you don't want to do one of these major award applications for your dissertation or doctoral project, just because it tends to require a certain amount of lead time. And by the time the grant would be awarded, you might be done with your whole research collection and your write-up already. But if you wanted to continue on it or to scale it up, absolutely. And you can see that there are some stuff for more established programs. And there's also stuff for early project development, pilot, and feasibility studies. And this is a particularly helpful one to keep in mind because no preliminary data is generally required. So you could have the foundation for one of those be your lit review and said, okay, well, these people said to do it. No one's done it yet. We want to get some preliminary data. And that's why it's going to fit within this 2-year time frame. And we're not going to spend more than $275,000 on it because it's about getting a preliminary data. And then you might go and apply for an NIH research project grant, this one up here, to make that even larger and more extensive. Now, I don't want to give the impression that you can only apply for government grants through a university. You can also do it through your school in some cases, if you work in a school, or through a hospital or medical center. And perhaps you work at a privately owned clinic. Well, there are grants for small businesses to work on different things. You can see that these two offerings, one is about commercializing innovative biomedical technologies, and I have seen some of my nursing students work on doing preliminary evaluations of devices as to not like implanted devices, but diagnostic things or things to improve patient follow through. With that, you just have to make sure that the principal investigator, the person whose name goes on as being in charge of the grant, that their main employment is with that small business, as opposed to, say, they're a part-time consultant. All right. There are more things on this page. My desire right now is to give you a taste of some of the different options available. And so that when you go looking for specifics, that you have a informed idea of some of the places that might align with your interests. There's a question in the chat. Is it true that grant writing is storytelling? Yes, very much. Now, there are different parts of the grant application, and part of that will include submitting a list of the people involved and what their qualifications are. But most grant applications will have a section that they call the narrative. And the grant narrative or grant application narrative is where you tell a story. And some of the elements of that story will be here's this problem or issue. Here's why the issue needs to be addressed. Here is what leads us to believe that what we're proposing is a possible way of addressing this. Or here's what we want to change to broaden this to make sure it's a good way to address this thing before you spend lots of money on it. And then how this grant will come in and make that a reality. So just to recap that, the story, the beginning when you set up the background, that's kind of like in a land far, far away, many years ago. That's setting up, okay, what are the basic circumstances that are being responded to? And then you explain why this team is informed and qualified to work on it and how usually the support of this particular institution or fund is necessary and essential to do it. If it looks like you can do the project just fine without the funding, there's that, well, why do you need our help? So that last part really brings it home with saying, oh, this is a story not just about this issue, about how you, the organization, in this case, it would be the National Institutes for Health, how this is how they are needed to step up and provide the funding. Excellent question. Now, you'll see on the slides here that we have a number of other resources here related to nursing. And at this point, I would ask if you feel comfortable to just disclose the program that you're in or the area of research that you're interested in, just so I know how much time to spend on these different examples. Because if we have more people in one department, we might look at those. And if we have more in another, we might look at those instead. But while I'm waiting for that, let me tell you about grants.gov. Now, there are some things that have made people much busier and arguably less happier than before. And one of these is social media. But something that I think has been an real help is the development of grants.gov as a central clearinghouse for where to find information about federal grants. So I'm going to open up grants.gov. And those of you who've been to many of my webinars may recall that I have some other things that I do outside of ACU. For example, I run a opera company called Really Spicy Opera. And one of the institutions that we apply for funds is the federal government. And we might be looking for things that might fit under the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and sometimes the National Institutes of Health, because there's a lot of health things that affect musicians as well. So let's just say that I am looking for an opportunity here and I want to search here. And so I just go to grants.gov, and in the search box, I just said, oh, I want to do opera. Let me go ahead and see what comes up. Now, you'll see that there is a smaller group of things here, and we want to check to make sure that it actually aligns with what we're looking for rather than something that also happens to include those letters. So these first three here are from the NEA, which is the National Endowment for the Arts. The others look like they're for different things, which may or may not align with that. And unless you're looking to do art stuff related to reproductive health, perhaps that last one is not so where we want to go. Now, we also have options here on the left to help limit it to, for example, the category arts. And so one of the things that this suggests to me is that my search term is a bit broad. I'm sorry, it is too specific, and I want to make it more broad, because opera is a genre within music. And this is something where we want to make sure that we're not cutting things out because we went too narrow early on. Just like when you're doing a literature search, you might enlist a librarian to help you find things and suggest alternate search terms. You can actually contact our ORSP, the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, and they will help you find things that are relevant to what you are interested in. And you'll see that actually by using the term music, we get many more results here, including various studies where they're looking for finding research on using music in medicine. And some of these require a clinical trial, and some of those do not. So this is more open and accessible to a early career researcher who hasn't done a lot with this. Now, I saw that there was a question in the chat about how broad to go in the narrative. And this is really a question of the scope of the project that you're applying for support for right now. And by right now, I mean you're applying right now, but that you want to use the money in a year down the line, because it does take a while for these things to be approved and for the funds to be transferred and all that stuff. So the office I was just referring to at ACU, that is the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, ORSP. The are linked in the slide deck. I'll also go ahead and I'll share the website link in the chat room. So if you are applying for a pilot study because you don't have data already and you want to get a little bit of data before you apply for a larger one, then in your narrative, you would talk about what you planned on doing in that particular period. What would happen afterwards might get mentioned briefly in terms of, we need this to be able to do a larger, say, 3-year study. But it's going to be a minor part because most of the narrative is focused on how it leads to the specific thing that you want them to fund right now. So if we're to just look at the examples here, you'll see that for the music category, we have a number of different things that come up. This is for the U.S. Embassy in Hungary. This one here is for it's for China, but specifically for the Consulate General in Hong Kong. And you can see that, oh, here's a specific opportunity of funding for stuff in the Hawaiian language, which, as someone whose mom's side is from Hawaii, I'm actually very interested in. That was not posted when I looked a couple days ago. You can see that that was just posted 2 days ago. So if you are looking for an opportunity and you're not seeing something active right now that corresponds to what you're looking for, uh, do check back. You can also save an alert so you get emails where new things that meet your searches show up. And also you can see that there are a number of different options here. So if you just want to see what's been done in the past, that's archived. Closed means it's not accepting applications right now. Posted means it's up here for people to read. Forecasted means they're expecting it's going to come back. So there are a lot of opportunities that are posted pretty much every year. So if it's not actively accepting applications right now, but it shows up in forecasted, it means they're expecting to get money for that and have that available. Let me look here for an example of that really quick. So actually, I'm going to use these checkboxes here to change that. So again, with the restriction for music, we can see that they're forecasting a number of things here. EGY, oh, what is that? EGY, oh, Egypt. Oh, great. This is actually a program that was suspended for several years after there was a coup d'etat in Egypt. So glad to see that back here. So let's go ahead and someone wrote in a request here. So I'm going to search for gerontology. And you may notice that I have misspelled that. So nothing comes up, but you can see that they've suggested a correct spelling. Now that's not bringing anything up either. There's another suggestion. And we can see, okay, that's just not coming up anything right now. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to gerontology. And you'll see that there are actually 7 closed and 52 archived calls here. So let's take a look at the closed one. So closed means that it was offered relatively recently. And we can see that, in the field of gerontology, there were actually several things here that were available. The reason this one is closed now and not posted or forecasted is that, well, this was actually already open for applications this year. So they're probably not going to be posting that one again until late this year. You can see that it was posted in December. It was open for 3 months, for 2 months. And actually, I know that there are several DMP students at ACU right now who are working on different reducing fall risk things with different programs. So a absolutely helpful thing is to go look and see what a old application has, even if it's not active right now, and see, it's not a small amount of money. So $200,000, that's enough to pay a couple people to spend a good amount of time on a project in a year. The floor is the minimum that you can apply for. The ceiling is the maximum that you can apply for this specific application at this specific time. This one, you can see that it has a fair variety of eligible applicants. So you could apply through a university. You could also apply through a nonprofit hospital. A for-profit hospital would not be included here. A for-profit nursing home would not be included. But you can see that there are many options here. And you can see the general goals. Okay, develop a result-based comprehensive strategy for reducing falls and fall risk, and increase the number of people participating in this sort of program. So you might have a program already and you say, okay, well, this study has shown it works. We want to see, can we get more people coming to this and using it and not falling? And that would be pursuing goal 2. Goal 1 would be if you say, well, okay, we actually don't know what will work for this community. We want to do some testing. We'll do a pilot. We'll try out an intervention and we'll do a pre and post test, check them before and after and see what they're doing. Or maybe you'll do a records review. So you see what was going on before, then you do the intervention, and then you do another records review to see if things changed afterwards. All right. Thank you for the example, by the way. That's very helpful. So let's change things here. Let's say that you are working in education, and now there is a question of, well, are you talking, say, a K-12 or a college? So let's go ahead and we'll just search for education here. And I'm going to reset my terms here so that we'll just look at the posted, like you could apply for it right now. And you can see that there's a lot of education stuff here, and that we see the term post-secondary education, which is another way of referring to higher education. And so we might try that as a search term later if we're not seeing what we want. There's a bunch of pandemic recovery stuff. We're not concerned with that. Other people at the university will applying for that. But let's say here, if you were applying for something to do teaching anywhere between grade 1 and grade 12 and to improve methods, you might go looking at something like this. And we see, okay, so it's about education, innovation, and research. Looks good so far. And this is a dense way that comes down to nonprofits and schools. All right. And you can see that they have 3 different tiers: early phase, mid phase, and expansion. And you can see that they even have an explanatory note. They differ in terms of the level of prior evidence of effectiveness required to be considered. So this is their way of telling you, yeah, if you're applying for an early phase grant, because it's early phase, we're not expecting you to have scads and scads of evidence. And it goes with the territory. On the other hand, if you're applying for an expansion, they are expecting to see lots of data, and there's more money on the table at that stage. Okay, now there are a couple more questions that I'm going to answer in turn. So one is, how can you get better at grant writing? And I will say that there are some excellent things here that ACU has a subscription to that you can watch. So through lynda.com, which is an employee training site that we have an institutional subscription, they have a lot of detailed video courses or workshops on working on grant proposals. And there are 2 that have been highlighted here. If you go and open up one of those, you can go searching for more of those. You will also find that most large funders have applicant workshops where they talk about the program and they field questions. And many of these institutions will give informal feedback if you approach them, usually at least 2 weeks before the application is due. The week of is probably not going to happen, but if you write them and you send in a draft a month in advance, usually you can get some detailed feedback because they do want you to succeed. If it's something as, well, okay, you're using terminology that probably won't sit well or won't make as strong an impact as if you do this other thing. Or, for example, on this page here, when they're talking about other resources, so one thing that many grants require, or many federal grants require, is that if you're affiliating with an individual or an institution, that you include a letter of support. Now, if the application is due in an hour and you haven't gotten anything more formal than an email saying I'm in, well, the email is better than nothing. But usually if you've sent this in, a couple weeks in advance and asked for feedback, if you included a couple emails, they would come back and say, we would love something on official letterhead with a signature, possibly even a letter from this specific office or this department, and because that shows that you've done a little bit more due diligence and it just looks more formal, like you have everything together. So that is another way to get feedback and improve that. You can certainly come to the Writing Center. Uh, our team includes it's 3 people with PhDs, and pretty much everyone with a PhD acquires some experience with applying for grants and stuff. So you can go see anyone on the team and ask for help. But you can also contact people in research and sponsored programs. So they're already in the ACU community with you, and you can ask them for some assistance. The level of insight that they'll be able to give you will depend on what they're doing and how many other people are writing, as are applying for things at that time. So usually, if you catch them at this part of the summer, it's great. If you're trying to get them in December when lots and lots of things are due, they've got reports due, they've got end of the year applications and all that stuff, that's not as easy to get feedback. If you were to start now, yes, you could probably get some great feedback from them. And I would say that writing a research grant proposal is much easier than writing a dissertation, also much faster. Just to give you an example, I submitted an application for a $25,000 grant on Friday. So that was just yesterday. All told, I spent probably around 10 hours on that. Now, I'm a more experienced grant writer. I've done this a while, so I have some practice. But some of my colleagues who do this professionally as the main part of their living, they would have knocked that out in 3 or 4 hours. And honestly, I spent half of that time because I said, you know what? The samples that they're asking for, we can make these look awesome, and that will just make a huge difference in my opinion. So I spent that time not rewriting the narrative, but making sure that the samples that we were including of the work we want to get supported, to make sure those looked really nice. Where people usually end up spending a ton of time the first time is actually just collecting all the materials that they need, numbers, mission statements, lists of the why this is important. And so if you're gathering that and then you're applying for multiple grants related to this, then each one becomes faster because you're not having to gather all that information from scratch each time. So there is a question of who can you communicate with related to grants? Well, that's going to depend on what you're applying for and who you're applying through or not. So if you're applying for an individual grant, and let me just show you in grants.gov, I'm going to go back to the main page and I'm going to do a search here. So search grants, and I want the advanced search interface. I want to see all the different examples, which is why I've gone here rather than just searching in the upper right-hand corner. So I'm looking at this and say, well, and I can't remember the percent that ACU normally takes for administering a grant, but usually for a research university, it's somewhere between 45 and 55% of the grant, and that's a lot of money. So let's say that you're looking at a smaller project and you say, well, I want one that is eligible for an individual. So you can look in this eligibility list and look through the different options here. So let's say that you do work for a for-profit company. This is actually very common in some fields where you are hired by a hospital or a surgical clinic as a specialist, and so you might be having your sole proprietorship or limited liability corporation that is technically the one being hired. So like, well, I want the money to go to my LLC for this project. The research will benefit many people, but the LLC would be administering it. And if that's the case, then we have a couple options to look at. There's for-profit organizations other than small businesses. So do you have more than a couple dozen employees? If not, you're a small business. If you do have more, well, you want to be, say, okay, if you're outside the bounds of the Small Business Association's definition of small business association, then you'd be checking this one. But if you're under 100, we want to go ahead and check small businesses here. And I see that we have a number of awards here from the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, and some of which relate to things that I have seen nursing students at ACU apply for. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this one here about therapies and tools for screening disorders for newborns. And you can see, let's look at the different details. So this is something that they're expecting that they're going to open this on July 1st or thereabouts, and that they're predicting that applications will be due around October 1st. It is available for a whole different range of things. So basically, for pretty much any institution type, you would be eligible for this. And this is one of the things that it underscores how important it is and the many different ways that newborns receive medical care. So this is something where you could apply as a small business or through the university. It kind of depends on your state. With the additional information on eligibility, let's go ahead and see. Well, they didn't really write anything else there, so I would say you could apply with a small business. It doesn't specifically say that you can apply as an individual. You probably could, but I would just send Molly here an email there. So she is the person whose job it is to answer questions about it, to confirm whether or not something is eligible. So just send her an email. Okay, so to answer some other questions that came in. So what is a research university? So there is this is in the realm of things that you don't need to know, but might be helpful to hear because it comes up in many places. So first, yes, ACU is a research university. Some of the different ways that you might just look at this, there are some colleges that are much more teaching colleges where the goal is that people will learn and the faculty are not expected to do research, or at least perhaps not research beyond the realm of pedagogy. Now, a lot of these colleges and universities that were set up as teaching colleges rather than research universities may have changed their name since then, and in some cases may have turned into research universities. So, for example, one of the major universities in the San Diego area is San Diego State University. That used to be called San Diego Teachers College because they thought, oh, well, we're teaching people to become teachers. And they weren't doing a lot of research, but that has changed and it's now a major research university. Now, there's something called the Carnegie System of Classifications for research universities. And that's all about describing the extent, the level of activity there. And this is actually mostly of concern if you're pursuing a job or tenure at that kind of university. Basically, R1 is the highest level of research activity. That would be, like the Harvards, the Yales, the Cornells, the Columbias, the University of California, San Diego's, and such of the country, where they're just doing a lot. They get tons of funding. In many cases, most of the faculty are doing more research than teaching. And it doesn't really matter for eligibility. I can't think of a federal funding opportunity that restricted by whether a college was a research university or not, or what level it was. Where it does matter is in tenure expectations, what they expect you to be doing to promote you and offer you a permanent contract. And also, there's some private foundations that uh, have funds that are only available for specific tiers. Uh, Here's an example for tenure stuff. So, one of my colleagues teaches and is tenured at Salem State College in Massachusetts. This was previously called Salem Teachers College. It is not a research university. It's definitely a teaching university one. So it would be at the bottom of the Carnegie list. I think it would be an R6 or something like that. And so basically, for him to get tenure, he just needed to teach for 3 years and get decent teaching evaluations. That was really pretty much all that they were looking at. And he said, well, it was very relaxing. They gave me tenure in 3 years. Now, at an R1, an R2, or R3 research university, there's an expectation that you'll be doing some publishing, and usually with an increasing frequency as you go up towards R1. So I got my PhD at Boston University, which is an R1 research university, meaning that very high level of output. And so for tenure, they expect you to have 3 articles published in so-called high-impact journals. They expect you to have a book where you edited the book and other people wrote chapters, and that you've written an original book. To get full tenure, they usually expect that you'll have written a textbook as well as written more articles and more books and things like that. That's where that stuff comes in. So hopefully that's helpful. But as far as the federal government is concerned, you can see that in this case, they say, well, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education and private institutions of higher education. So basically, if it's a college or university, it qualifies for this one. So ACU is a private institution of higher education, meaning it's not affiliated with the state. It doesn't receive funding as a state university. But it's very rare to see general research funding that is tied to that. It's usually when it's something like, funds for improving retention at a public and state controlled institution where it would have a restriction there. But good question. So for the terminology, grants versus proposals. So a grant proposal is the same thing as a grant application. It's basically saying, here's this issue, here's what we want to do related to that issue, and here's why you should fund us. And so the proposal, you can understand that name is referring to, we propose to do this if you give us the money. Some people will shorthand grant proposal and just say, oh, I submitted the grant. And so long as you remember that the shorthand for grant proposal, then and the confusion usually clears up right away. Another question about whether a certain personality is more conducive to research or not. That's usually something that people figure out by doing, and then it may change during the course of what they're doing. And I'll give you an analogy in another field and then an example in higher education. So in my own case, in opera, I started out and I was writing operas and directing operas, and I have moved to a different sort of leadership role over the years. And it's not that I don't direct shows and rehearse people, but not as much as I used to. I moved into more of a producer role where I apply for funds and I get us money, and then I do all that leadership stuff that goes with it. Now, some people will do that because no one else will, and that's the only way that they get the money to do it. And then as soon as they can either get a large enough award to make someone else do that money, like hire a grant writer or hire a financial administrator, or get a award through their university. So the university does a lot of that paperwork stuff for them. Uh, they will go back to doing the things that they like the most. Now, in terms of dissertating, if you're working on a dissertation or doctoral project, very often you will have a strong response to that. Some people will say, okay, I did that, like passing a kidney stone. I never want to do that again. And that's okay. Other people will say, I liked doing that. I wouldn't mind doing a little bit on the side. And so I'll be selective. We will apply for grants. And if we get the grant, we'll do it. And if not, we won't. And other people say, I want this to be the main focus of what I do. And if that's something, then you're probably thinking that you want to move towards an administrative leadership type position. And that could be angling to head a lab or a research center, or could mean becoming a department chair, or moving into perhaps an office of research and sponsored programs. Uh, a good friend of mine is the director of fellowships and scholarships at a major university. And she does research on her own and she writes a little bit on her own. But, her main thing that she's chosen to do is to help other people get money. And that's very gratifying in that, you get this constant gratification as people go out and get stuff. And that validation regularly is actually very nice. Uh, she tells me about, oh, we got so many Fulbright awards, and so we're waiting to hear back on this thing. And so it's like good news comes all the time, as opposed to if you're, very project based and you're working with one particular center, you might be waiting a long time and then you hear back from everyone at the end of a fiscal year or something like that. An on-staff grant writer, that kind of depends, because if you're going after major awards or minor things, are you in a department versus ORSP? I will say that most of the grant writers that I know charge something over $40 an hour. And then it kind of depends on the scale of the kind of things that they're applying for and how much they're involved. Are they they're coming in and putting the polish on it, or are they writing the first draft? I know someone who regularly gets multi-million dollar grants, and she doesn't show up for less than $150 an hour. Now, because of that, they have other people that they have doing all that, collecting the data, collecting the notes, writing a first draft, and then they hand it to her and she does her magic. And they say, yes, it was a little bit to pay for 4 hours of that time at $150 an hour, but look how great the grant is, and we think this will make a huge difference. And often for people who are specializing in the National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation, they have a lot of inside knowledge and they know just how to write things to make it work right and to fit within the space limitations. On the subject of public data, well, let me bring up an example of something where you could actually go look and see what someone would charge. So there are various databases out there that allow you to see what public sector employees make. And I mentioned that there are some public sector, meaning it's funded by, affiliated with a state or local government, where they are legally required to post the compensation. And one of those happens to be an R1 university. So I'm thinking of the University of California, San Diego. And so I'm just going to search for UCSD salary database. Now, I worked for the University of Tennessee Chattanooga, which was also a public one. And so there's the same case. If it's a public university, you can look this up. So let's say we want to look up a UCSD employee's compensation here. There are actually several different databases that will use the same data set. You can look for title, you can look for your name for the campus and browse. Let's go ahead and let's say that we were looking for grant writer. Now, there's probably not going to be too many with that specific title in the research office. More on that in a moment, but let's do a search. All right, so this is making us select a location. So we'll go ahead and select UCSD. And I mentioned that that's probably not going to turn up a result here because of just how the job titles tend to work. So let's go find UCSD's Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, or its equivalent. And I'm actually just going to do research UCSD Research Programs Office. I can't remember what theirs is called off the top of my head. And so there's the Office of Undergraduate Research. We're not going to worry about that. That's usually about more administering some internal funds and administering the opportunities specifically to undergrads. But the Office of Research Affairs here, this one here, UCSD Research Affairs, that looks like where we want to go. And so what I'm going to do here is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to look up, okay, who works here? And you can see it's important enough that they have a vice chancellor for it with several different levels. And we have different things within here. Government research relations, I would guess that people who report directly to Faith Hawkins and report directly to Angela Phillips Diaz are going to be great ones to look at for people who might actually be administering grants or working on writing grant applications. All right, so we got their full list of contacts here. It may or may not have an org chart. It does. Great. All right, so let's see. Let's go for research proposal development services. There will be other things where you might be working on writing grants or helping people write grants, but I think that this is going to be a great one to look at. So we've got Sharon Franks here. All right. So we'll go back to the database we looked at earlier. We're going to axe that title, and we'll just do a search. All right. Now, although the official title that she has is Academic Coordinator 3 or Level 3, in government institutions, they often have very obtuse titles like that. Now, you can see that the job pays well. San Diego is an expensive place to work, but it pays well enough to live in San Diego, certainly. So this is why I showed you the process of looking up someone's job title or looking and seeing who works for a different office and then looking them up by name rather than typing in the title, because often it's not what you'd expect. I had a supervisor whose public title was director of this and that, and for some strange reason, they were classified by human resources and hence in the database as being a marketing assistant. And you get a lot of that bizarre stuff in institutions that have been around for a while. So I will say that the higher level you go up and the greater your history of bringing in awards, of landing awards, the more you tend to make, because people who don't get pay increases and they're landing that kind of money will go to some place that does give them pay increases. So it tends to compensate well. Internal grant writers will get paid regardless of the award. Independent grant writers will usually charge an hourly rate. Some will also have a spec fee, meaning they're saying, okay, we're giving you a discount on the application writing, but if this goes through, you're going to be paying us more out of that grant. So it is possible to get extra money if the grant is funded. Of course, everyone wants the grant to be funded, but a lot of this stuff is not guaranteed. And here's an example of a grant that you normally get in multi-year increments, and this one will be in the education area, specifically student success. So TRIO programs, which are designed to create a structured environment and funding to help students from underserved backgrounds, usually minorities and other groups that have been historically underrepresented. And so a TRIO program that usually comes in a 3-year award. ACU actually got a new TRIO award somewhat recently. So let me just see what we can come up with for that search. And because there's so much stuff on the ACU website, it might just end up being faster for us to go out to Google. But let's get it. Aha! So this was published in ACU Today. Yeah, so as an institution, we recently got a $1.3 million federal grant to run and pay for the TRIO programs that the Student Support Services manages. So this was actually for a 5-year program. And so something that comes up here, so TRIO programs, it's usually some combination of someone within that office and someone within the research office, the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs for us, because it's something where the universe is like, that's a lot of money, and this is a program that's really important to us. So let's throw both ORSP and the Student Success Center resources at this. And at some other colleges and universities I've worked for, the program has often been initiated by the Student Success Center writing a first draft of the application and then bringing in their equivalent of ORSP to work on it. We're actually at the hour now, so we're going to have to wrap things up. Let me just tell you briefly about what is in the slide deck that you will receive if you RSVP'd for the webinar. If you didn't RSVP for the webinar and you want to be on the email list, just type your email address in the chat window and I'll make sure you to add that to the email that goes out. Because people often ask about the application materials for other things, so we've included in here some lists of common requirements. I've included some of the sample materials for Fulbright that I've been doing and some guidance on letters of recommendation and other things like that, and additional grant listings and databases. So those are all in the slide deck. Those are supplements. We go into those things in more detail in other installments of Intro to Grant Writing, and you can watch videos for those online. All right, so I see a couple more questions. So how can we find resources for getting more involved with the university? I'm not 100% certain about what you're asking there. So if you're trying to get more funding from the university, that usually involves, if you're a student, finding either a funding that's been set aside for, in this case, I'm guessing graduate students, or finding a faculty person to partner with on either applying for or spending research funding that they can get from the university. We talked about an example of that earlier. Let me go back to the ORSP website to show an instance of that. So here on the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, so internal grants, one of the things that to be aware is that often there's the idea that graduate students will be working through faculty. And so, for example, when I was at UTC, I applied for funding to have graduate students work with me. And I had to apply for a faculty grant that then I would include in my budget, paying for the research assistants. And so that's one way to do it. Another way is to approach a faculty person saying, hey, I would like you to be the principal investigator of record on this thing that I want to apply for and apply for through the university. And so at some point, the faculty person will send you an email that says, great, let's do it. I'm willing to be the PI. And you would contact ORSP saying, hey, I'm applying for this things. This professor's agreed to be the PI. Anything I should know, and they will refer you to various resources and say, okay, check in with me here. At one of my other universities, I would just email the people in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and say, hey, can I chat? I'm working on these things, and I know it's different at every place. And the last time I did that, they said, oh, yeah, so we'll add you to the system. You'll get all our emails on it. Come and talk with us during our regular office hours and all these other things. And you'll see that there is this guideline here that ACU faculty members can submit one internal grant that's applying for funds ACU already has. They can submit one of those per year. So if you're thinking about it now, I'd say reach out to faculty aid now, because if they're going to include you, you want to be on the radar in advance. And if they're not planning on applying for something now, you can propose something, and that's something where if you're doing most of the work and it's a project that they believe in, that's an easy sell. I'm not sure what you mean by entity information, but let's go back to grants.gov here and look at that. If you can supply some additional information in the chat window, that will help me understand what that question is here. Entity usually refers to an organization. And so if we're talking about the applicant entity, that would be, for example, if I was applying for this NIH grant through ACU, then ACU would be the applicant entity. If I was applying for, if I was looking for grants that only were available for that, or that I wanted to make sure was available, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the search down to be just posted, and I'm going to go ahead and under eligibility say, okay, I want a college and university nonprofit, and that would be, in this case, it's listed under private institutions of higher education. So now I'm seeing those that are eligible for that, and this is more than 1,100 here. Now, let's say that I was applying for a project talking about that earlier one about falls and reducing elderly falling. And so if I'm doing that at a clinic and it's a nonprofit health clinic, then I'd go ahead and that would be nonprofits that do not have, nonprofits having a 501c3 status other than institutions of higher education. Okay, I might ask for some more information here, but if you want to see what has been used in the past, then we just go to closed or archived to look at what was there. In this case, archive, let's say that we are talking about faculty, doing research on faculty in some sort. And oh, by the way, this is a great award. If you're doing anything involving the sciences, they fund you for multiple years and train you up and everything. Let's just say that we were looking at this Alliances for Graduate Education and Professoriate. So this is something that is open right now. It is offered, I believe, every year. And this is something that you can do when there's something that you know has been offered before because you searched in the archive grants area. You can write the person who's administering it, which in this case, let's see, it's just a Grantsgov support at nsf.gov. You can write them and ask if you can see a sample of a past application. And often these are posted on the website, but sometimes they don't cover the specific thing you're looking for, and you can ask. I'm just going to show you an example of something that I applied for that does include samples. So if I go to the uh, landing page here for National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowships, and I'm bringing this one up because it's one I applied for in the current cycle, and so I know where everything is. You can find some things on the NSF website and for the other agencies granting stuff. So you'll see that they include here all the instructions you'd expect, frequently asked questions, list of recently funded things. So you're trying to know, okay, well, what kinds of things have they found acceptable recently? Am I in that ballpark? And also, you can see that they have a large list of sample application narratives where you can go and look and see what someone else submitted for a narrative. These are most agencies will post examples of narratives that were successful, which is very helpful. In this case, let's go ahead and let's look at this American history thing. And they usually won't include someone's budget, uh, but you can see here we have, in this case, it's 3 pages of narrative. Uh, this particular application says make it single space, 1 inch margins and stuff. So you can see they used every single bit of space within those parameters. And this particular one requires that you submit a bibliography of up to 1 page. And so they gave exactly 1 page's worth of that. So it's very helpful because you know, okay, my application materials or this portion of my application materials should look like this. And I didn't use this particular one, but I used an example, one of the other examples that looks very similar when I was applying for that. So excellent questions. We should wrap up there, and I'll just say those are great questions. Learning to write grant applications is like everything else in your graduate studies. The more that you do, and the more often you do it, the better you get at it. And we have a lot of human and other resources at ACU that are available that can give you help. And if you start sooner, you'll find that there are lots of events on campus and increasingly, especially because of last year, offered online that will allow you to be in conversation before you submit something. So don't feel like you have to learn everything overnight. There are structures that will help you build up that knowledge, build up the terminology and everything as you go along. So I hope that's helpful. Have a great evening, everyone.